In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. In declaring myself thus, I am fully aware that I will be going expressly against the wishes of my family, my friends, and I hardly need add my own better judgment. The relative situation of our families is such that any alliance between us must be regarded as a highly reprehensible connection. Indeed, as a rational man, I cannot but regard it as such myself, but it cannot be helped. Almost from the earliest moments of our acquaintance, I have come to feel for you a passionate admiration and regard, which, despite all my struggles, has overcome every rational objection, and I beg you most fervently to relieve my suffering and consent to be my wife.
In such cases as these, I believe the established mode is to express a sense of obligation. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly. I'm sorry to cause pain to anyone, but it was most unconsciously done, and I hope will be of short duration.
And this is all the reply I am to expect. I might wonder why, with so little effort at civility, I am rejected.
And I might wonder why, with so evident a desire to offend and insult me, you chose to tell me that you like me against your will, against your reason, and even against your character. Was this not some excuse for incivility if I was uncivil? I have every reason in the world to think ill of you.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Sounds like a job. Verbal diorama. She watches all the movies, from comedy to drama. From the top roll sound. And don't forget the action. She'll watch until the end and then she'll give you her reaction. Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and outtakes. Movies you know, movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
Hi everyone, I'm Em and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 311, Pride and Prejudice. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't, that's hosted by another obstinate, headstrong girl. Welcome to Verbal Diorama. Whether you're a brand new listener to this podcast or a regular returning listener, thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast. I'm so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of Pride and Prejudice, but specifically the 1995 BBC TV series of Pride and Prejudice. This is a very special episode to celebrate a very special day, because today, as of this episode being released, is my birthday. And every year, I put out a special birthday episode. And usually that's a movie that means a lot to me. Over the years, I've done birthday episodes on The Iron Giant, Jurassic Park, Labyrinth, Grease 2, It Is the Superior Grease, The Wedding Singer, Snowpiercer, and this year, a 6-part TV series that had me completely spellbound in 1995. A series I rewatch regularly and love unconditionally. And a bit later, some very special guests will be joining this episode to talk about why the 1995 BBC version of Pride and Prejudice remains the most beloved version of Jane Austen's novel. But, of course, whether you are a brand new listener or a regular returning listener, thank you so much for supporting this podcast, listening to this podcast, and continuing to do so. It genuinely means so much, especially on a birthday episode. It's always a chance for me to reflect on this podcast. This is the 7th annual birthday episode of this podcast. This podcast has been going a ridiculously long time. I can't believe I've had now 7 birthdays doing this podcast. but your support genuinely means so much. And this really is the definitive love story. It may well have started the enemies to lovers trope that now runs through the DNA of modern romance fiction, but it also helped create a generation of Jane Austen readers that weren't just forced to read it for A-level English literature class, including me. I own this novel in several different versions, also in this particular version of the TV series, on VHS, DVD and Blu-ray. To me, this is the most perfect Jane Austen adaptation. It is handsome enough to tempt me. In vain I have struggled to not do an episode on this series. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. 1995 BBC TV series Pride and Prejudice. And here's the trailer for Pride and Prejudice.
His name is Darcy, and he has a mighty fortune and a great estate. Don't you think he's the handsomest man you've ever seen, girls?
I wonder if he'd be quite so handsome if he was not quite so rich.
I find myself quite content with my situation, Lizzie.
I am determined that nothing but the very deepest love will induce me into matrimony.
I shall never understand why you go through the world determined to be displeased with everything and everyone in it.
Mr. Darcy, now you see you're not the best of friends.
I will never understand why you are in such a rage to approve of everything and everyone that you meet.
I believe I can guess your thoughts at this moment.
I should imagine not. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
Perhaps you have not had the advantage, Miss Bennet, of moving in society.
This match to which you have the presumption to aspire can never take place.
I didn't always love him. He is truly the best man I have ever known. I shall never see him again.
Miss Bennet.
Mr. Darcy.
Mr. Bingley, a wealthy gentleman from the north of England, settles down at the rented Netherfield estate near Merriton Village in Hertfordshire for the autumn. 3 miles from Netherfield, the Bennet family of Longbourn is excited at the prospect of a wealthy new neighbour, and Mrs. Bennet in particular wishes to marry off one of her 5 daughters to the newcomer. When they meet, Bingley takes an immediate liking to eldest daughter Jane at the local country dance, while his best friend Mr. Darcy, rumoured to be twice as rich as Bingley, is too proud to dance with anyone, including second eldest daughter Elizabeth. Let's quickly run through the incredible cast of this series. Jennifer Ely as Elizabeth Bennet, Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy, Alison Steadman as Mrs. Bennet, Benjamin Whitrow as Mr. Bennet, David Bamber as Mr. Collins, Susanna Harker as Jane Bennet, Crispin Bonham Carter as Mr. Bingley, Adrian Lucas as Mr. Wickham, Julia Sawala as Lydia Bennet, Polly Maberly as Kitty Bennet, Lucy Bryers as Mary Bennet, Lucy Scott as Charlotte Lucas, Anna Chancellor as Caroline Bingley, Lucy Robinson as Mrs. Hurst, and Barbara Lee Hunt as Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Pride and Prejudice has a screenplay by Andrew Davis, was directed by Simon Langton, and of course based on Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And so our story has to start with Jane Austen. She was born in 1775 into a comfortable but not wealthy family in rural Hampshire. Her father, George Austen, was a rector, and her mother, Cassandra Lee Austen, came from a family with minor aristocratic connections. This positioned the Austens in the lower ranks of the gentry. They were educated and genteel, but had to be careful about money. And this was a situation that deeply influenced Austen's understanding of the social and economic pressures facing women of her class. Austen was one of 8 children in a lively intellectual household that valued reading, writing and wit. Her father encouraged her literary pursuits from an early age, and she began writing satirical sketches and stories as a teenager. The family often performed plays and charades, fostering Austen's sharp ear for dialogue and social observation. Pride and Prejudice has a complex history that spans much of Austen's adult life. She began the novel between 1796 to 1797 when she was in her early 20s, initially titling it First Impressions. This was during a period when she was actively part of the local social scene, attending balls and social gatherings that would later inform her detailed descriptions of such events. The timing is significant because Austen was at the age when marriage was a pressing concern for women of her class. She experienced her own romantic disappointments during this period, including a brief flirtation with barrister Tom Lefroy, the future Lord Chief Justice of Ireland, and a brief engagement to Harris Big Wither in 1802 that she broke off after one day, despite the practicality of the match and his wealth, meaning her family could be financially taken care of for life. She realised she'd made a mistake in accepting his proposal. This personal experience with the tension between practical and romantic considerations in marriage would end up deeply informing Elizabeth Bennet's dilemma. Austen substantially revised Pride and Prejudice between 1811 and 1812, before its publication in 1813, 2 years after her first novel, Sense and Sensibility. Like many female authors of the time, Austen published her books anonymously, as women were supposed to prioritise being wives and mothers, with creative pursuits like writing seen to degrade femininity. Sense and Sensibility was presented as being written by a lady, but Pride and Prejudice was attributed to the author of Sense and Sensibility. Pride and Prejudice was the only of Austen's novels not published on commission, and that means at the author's financial risk. She sold the copyright for Pride and Prejudice to her publisher, Thomas Egerton, in exchange for £110, meaning that all of the risk and all of the profits would be his. It's been suggested that Egerton subsequently made around £450 just from the first 2 editions of the book, which quickly sold out. While Jane Austen would make the equivalent of $9,300 in today's money with her one-off payment for Pride and Prejudice, roughly 3 years of an average salary at the time, it's ironic that the author who wrote so perceptively about the importance of financial security made a choice that cost her significantly in the long run, although she had no way of knowing Pride and Prejudice would become such an endearing classic. While Pride and Prejudice was well received by critics and readers, with the first edition selling out within the first year, and it never going out of print, the success was relatively modest by today's standards. Austen and her novels remained relatively obscure for decades, but began to reach unprecedented levels of popularity and interest during the Victorian era. Victorian society valued domestic virtue and moral instruction, and Pride and Prejudice was seen as a safe novel that promoted proper values while entertaining readers. The book's emphasis on character development and moral growth aligned with Victorian sensibilities. By the beginning of the 20th century, an increasing number of readers started to pick up her books. Scholarly interest in her novels emerged, and universities added her works to their curriculums. This academic recognition was crucial in cementing Austen's status as a major literary figure, and the novel's enduring appeal stems from its universal themes that transcend historical periods: the tensions between first impressions and deeper understanding, the balance between practical and romantic considerations in relationships, and the social dynamics of class and gender remained relevant to contemporary readers across generations. And so, of course, televised adaptations were inevitable, and the first televised adaptation of Pride and Prejudice was produced by the BBC, unsurprisingly in 1938, which is now lost because it was performed live and never recorded. Other lost English-language TV adaptations were produced in 1949, 1952 and 1958. The BBC's 1967 six-part series marked the 150th anniversary of Austen's death, starred Celia Bannerman and Lewis Flander as Lizzie and Darcy respectively, and is the earliest television adaptation produced by the BBC to exist. The BBC and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation co-produced 1980s Pride and Prejudice, starring Elizabeth Garvey and David Rintoul. Until the mid-1990s, only one major film had been made on Austen's works, which was 1940s Pride and Prejudice, starring Greer Garson and Laurence Olivier. But the explosion of adaptations in the 90s brought Austen to entirely new audiences, and solidified her place in popular culture. They called it Austen Mania, and it happened in 1995. And 1995 was a remarkable year for Jane Austen adaptations, with 4 major productions released almost simultaneously. The BBC's 6-part Pride and Prejudice miniseries, Ang Lee's film Sense and Sensibility, written by and starring Emma Thompson alongside Kate Winslet, and the BBC's Persuasion, starring Amanda Root and Kieran Hines, as well as the one you probably wouldn't be thinking of, Clueless, starring Alicia Silverstone. Persuasion aired on the BBC on the 16th of April 1995. Clueless, which is of course based on Emma, graced cinema screens sporadically starting on the 19th of July 1995. Pride and Prejudice aired over 6 weeks between the 24th of September and the 29th of October 1995, and Sense and Sensibility released on the 13th of December 1995 in the US. Here in the UK we wouldn't get it until February 1996, but it still counts. While it's not a straight Austen adaptation and more inspired by it, Clueless actually strengthens the case for 1995 as a singular Austen moment, because it reached a completely different demographic than the period adaptations. While Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility and Persuasion appealed primarily to literary and period drama audiences, Clueless brought Austen to teenagers and young adults who might never have picked up one of her novels. Emma would get a straight movie adaptation in 1996, starring Gwyneth Paltrow. But in terms of Austen's adaptations, only one set the benchmark for how to adapt her work faithfully, completely, as well as adding its own embellishments. Pride and Prejudice, 1995, has never been surpassed in terms of cultural influence or adoration. In many ways, there are 2 eras for Jane Austen, before Pride and Prejudice in 1995 and after Pride and Prejudice in 1995. It undoubtedly led the way for others. But how did this adaptation come to be? Well, it was late in 1986, after watching a BBC TV adaptation of Austen's Northanger Abbey, that producer Sue Birtwistle and screenwriter Andrew Davies agreed to adapt Pride and Prejudice, one of their favourite books for television. Birtwistle had been a student of Davies at Coventry College of Education. Fun fact, that's now part of the University of Warwick, not far from this podcast. And also, Andrew Davies lives in nearby Kenilworth, which is where this podcast was born. Davies and Birtwistle had similar ideas for how an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice should be made. They agreed to do it, shook hands, and 7 years later, they would make that dream a reality. Davies set about adapting the novel into a screenplay, which he admits was no chore. He would call it a sheer pleasure. But they agreed they wanted an adaptation that served the drama, something that looked almost cinematic in scale and scope, not stuck filming on tiny sets in BBC Television Centre like many previous period dramas had been, but instead shot on location, a prime-time TV experience, not a Sunday tea-time drama. Lavish, fresh and lively, something that remained true to the tone and spirit of the source material. Davies would avoid the narrator of the novel, as well as use the various letters sent to characters by actually having characters read those letters, either aloud, in their heads with narration on screen, or reading aloud to other characters. His screenplay also steps away from a vision of emotional restraint and portrays emotions in a modern interpretation of the story, as well as, let's be honest, positioning Darcy well within the female gaze. For the female characters, he wrote a lot of scenes where they're getting dressed, they're in their nighties, talking about love and relationships, and he wanted the male characters to be doing lots of physical things, riding horses, fencing, having baths, jumping in lakes, any legitimate excuse to take clothing off. It also exaggerates characters for comic effect, like Mrs. Bennet's hysteria and Mr. Collins's sycophancy and boastfulness. Davies planned for 5 episodes originally, but TV scheduling is a fine art, and 6 were required. He delivered 3 scripts to executives in late 1986, including the BBC's rival ITV. Before the BBC agreed to produce the series, it was discussed with several channels. ITV seemingly thought it was too soon after the 1980 version, but the BBC leapt at the idea. And the reason for this was simple. British TV was changing. The BBC, as a publicly funded broadcaster, was compelled to source 25% of its content from independent production companies. This, and the impending renewal of its Royal Charter in 1996, caused the BBC to question its programming, and especially its more staple offerings like period drama, which had long been a prime source of entertainment over the years, and mostly produced cheap and quick. But quality TV didn't come cheap, and they needed financial assistance, especially with a series budgeted at $6 million, which was almost unheard of for a period drama TV series. The American A&E network agreed to co-fund. Pride and Prejudice's lavish $1 million per episode budget would be remarkable for the 90s, but you can literally see every penny on screen. From the beautiful locations, sets and costume design, real care and attention was lavished on this series. The costume designer was Dinah Collin, and she researched surviving clothing from the era, fashion plate and museum collections across the world. She wanted to get an overall accurate period look, but didn't want to sacrifice modern-day appeal as well as actor comfort. She didn't want this to look like actors in costume, but that these were real people wearing real clothes. They used custom fabrics which were screen-printed and unable to be ironed, and this was after the first-choice Indian fabrics were seen as too modern. Almost everything had to be made for this production from scratch, as there are very few film and TV costumes of the Regency era available for rental, and those authentic garments that were still around were too delicate to be worn consistently. The one exception to this rule was the militia's red jackets, a favourite of Lydia, which ended up being sourced from Italy. 35 people would make all the rest of the costumes at the costumier, and afterwards those costumes went into rental stock to be used for other period dramas. Dinah Collin and her team had about 2 months to make the costumes before filming began. Costumes and wigs would cost the production more than £10,000 a day. And these costumes had to be distinct for character so you could understand personalities, motivations and class. There had to be distinctions between, for example, the extremely wealthy Bingley sisters and the moderately well-to-do Bennet sisters, and also various servants. But there were even deviations between the Bennet sisters, with Mary preferring a more modest high-collared dress. The low-necked day dress that the rest of the sisters wear probably wasn't particularly period accurate because they would likely wear a lace chemisette, but it works to show Mary's pious nature in comparison to her sisters. The Bingley sisters were dressed in brightly coloured silks with embellishments, feathers and brooches, with the Bennet girls dressed in light-coloured, minimally patterned cotton, lots of whites, greens and pale colours to reflect their innocence, and for Elizabeth, her practicality and active nature. The darker, richer, heavier fabrics were not really for walking 3 miles in the mud to Netherfield. Speaking of which, the shoes were reproductions of original Regency shoes. Even for the contrast between Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy, Darcy wore dark colours, greens and greys, whereas Bingley wore warmer colours. The men had high collars and also wore knee-length breeches for formal occasions, which was actually more fashionable at the time for gentlemen than ankle-length trousers. Apparently everything worn by Darcy is historically accurate, but pieces were still created that would look like clothing that could be bought in the modern era, like a white shirt that would go see-through when wet, etc. Many of the actors wore wigs, including Jennifer Ely, which were custom-made by Ray Marston for the main female stars, with the rest coming from the BBC's archive. The hair and makeup designer was Caroline Noble, and the cast is basically a who's who of British film and TV, but it launched the career of Colin Firth into the stratosphere. Sue Birtwistle had worked with Firth on the film Dutch Girls in 1985, and he had never read Pride and Prejudice before Birtwistle called him to offer him the role of Fitzwilliam Darcy. Firth wasn't initially interested, believing it to be formal, stiff and stilted, but he was sent 5 pages of Andrew Davis's script and he was immediately hooked and knew he needed to play the role. He watched Laurence Olivier's version and thought he was fantastic, but he realised this was a part that was precious to so many people. Not a traditional romantic love at first sight hero, but the ideal love that blossoms over time romantic lead. Darcy was layered, complex, interesting, passionate, and this was something Andrew Davies specifically wanted to focus on. With Austen's story primarily focusing on Lizzie, he wanted to give Darcy more depth. This version, as noted by Birtwistle and Davis, is primarily about sex and money. By emphasising Darcy's point of view, we see his passionate feelings and how he attempts to cope with quashing them, which is where the lake comes in. It wasn't in the book, and yet it's become the defining moment of the series. An attempt to cool his tumultuous feelings for a woman he then comes across in a state of sullen dress. But I'm going to come back to that. American actress Jennifer Ehle was one of the hundreds of actresses who auditioned for various parts. Casting directors were looking for actors aged between 15 and 28 and were specifically looking for someone with wit, charm and charisma. Canonically, Elizabeth is 20 years old and Darcy is 28. Their choices for the two protagonists would determine the other actors cast, and Ehle would be present in almost every scene, and so she had to be available for the entire filming schedule. And the fact that I always thought she was British goes to show just how well cast she is. But most importantly, the chemistry between Jennifer Ehle's Lizzie with Colin Firth's Darcy was immediate and electric, which was crucial for the success of the adaptation. The pair would have a brief relationship during filming, but this wasn't disclosed till after the fact. Crispin Bonham Carter, third cousin of Helena, auditioned for Wickham before being cast as the amiable Bingley, mostly because of his physical contrast to Colin Firth. Adrian Lucas won the role of Wickham after a screen test on the set of another film. Susanna Harker's mother played Jane in the earlier TV adaptation in 1967, and so it felt fate that she too would also play Jane. She dedicated her performance to her grandmother, whose favourite book was Pride and Prejudice. Anna Chancellor, who plays Caroline Bingley, also has a link to Jane Austen. She is Austen's 6 times great niece. Julia Sawano, who plays the 15-year-old Lydia, was 25 in real life, a year older than Jennifer Ehle, who plays her sister 5 years older than her. 2 weeks before filming began, about 70 of the cast and crew gathered for a script read-through, followed by rehearsals, dance lessons, horse riding, fencing, and other skills that needed to be ready ahead of the actual filming. Filming took place between June 1994 and November 1994 to reflect the changing seasons in the plot, and this was followed by post-production up until mid-May 1995. The production aimed for 10.5-hour shooting days, plus time for costume and makeup. 24 locations were used for filming, alongside 8 studio sets. Cinematographer John Kenway made the choice to film on Super 16mm film, which gives higher grain and detail over 35mm film. And this was rather than the cheaper film and video combination of earlier costume dramas. Scenes at the fictional town of Meryton were filmed at the very real town of Laycock in Wiltshire. In order to transform the town into a Regency period village, set designers paid special attention to detail and had to ask residents and store owners for permission to paint doors, windows and doorknobs of their homes and shops. Luckington Court nearby served as the interior and exterior of the Bennet family home Longbourn, which has been lived in by the same family for 40 years and perfectly preserved. Edgecott House in Northamptonshire served as the interior and exterior of Netherfield, with Brocket Hall used as the Netherfield Ballroom. Belton House in Lincolnshire served as the exterior for Rosings Park, with Mr. Collins' modest parsonage, filmed at the Old Rectory in Rutland. Filming in real houses across grassy fields, green woodlands and mud-soaked country lanes adds an air of authenticity, because anyone who's ever taken a walk in the English countryside is immediately transported there through this adaptation. But the most famous location has to be Lyme Park in Cheshire, because that was used for the exteriors of Pemberley. But management problems meant the interiors of Pemberley were instead filmed at Sudbury Hall in Derbyshire. Lyme Park's grounds were used for the pond scene, where a stuntman did the actual diving. the BBC opposed Davis's original plans for Darcy to dive in the pond naked because they're a family-friendly broadcaster and suggested he wear undergarments. But Regency men didn't actually wear them. No tighty-whities for Darcy. So it was changed for him to dive in wearing his shirt and breeches. And it ended up becoming one of the most unforgettable moments in British TV history, often emulated by other shows, including by Colin Firth himself. The underwater sequence was filmed in a large tank at Ealing Studios, and Firth actually did this swimming, but he ended up slamming his nose on a steel girder in the tank during the first take. His nose was so bloody and swollen that the crew had to shut down filming for a day. It's worth adding that Colin Firth was not allowed to jump into the actual pond because of the risk of Weil's disease, which means he couldn't be insured. Speaking of ponds, or indeed lakes, let's segue into the obligatory Keanu reference for this episode. And if you don't know what that is, it's where I try and link everything that I feature, not movie because this isn't a movie, everything that I feature with Keanu Reeves. The easiest way to link Keanu Reeves to Pride and Prejudice is via a movie called The Lake House, which stars Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, because in that movie he uses Jane Austen's persuasion to connect with Sandra Bullock's character through time, and the book, Persuasion, even appears in the movie. And that is the easiest way to link Keanu to Pride and Prejudice via Jane Austen, via Persuasion. Many scenes in the book, Pride and Prejudice, are dances or balls. And in the TV adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, everyone loves a ball. So music and dance would be pivotal. Carl Davis had been writing scores for the BBC since the mid-70s, and he used contemporary classical music, which is a thing, even though you would think contemporary classical don't go together. They kind of do. He would use that as inspiration for the music, which also features forte pianist Melvin Tan. The forte piano, or pianoforte, became obsolete in the late 19th century with the modern grand piano. But by the late 20th century, the forte piano was revived and is now built in specialist workshops. The Pride and Prejudice theme is strongly inspired by the finale of Beethoven's Emperor Concerto. The music was recorded in 6 hours by a group of up to 18 musicians and then fed into tiny earpieces of the screen musicians, who mimed playing the instruments. Choreographer Jane Gibson based the dance choreography on the adapted book of country dances from 1966 by W.S. Porter, which had several late 18th century dances by Charles and Samuel Thompson, such as the Shrewsbury Lasses, A Trip to Highgate, and Mr. Beveridge's Maggot. These dances were actually out of fashion by the early 19th century, but still gave an impression of authenticity. It's a little bit like the Lindy Hop being performed today. 15 dances were choreographed and rehearsed before filming, with often only 3 days to learn the steps. And when I tell you that this TV series was huge here in the UK, I don't think I can actually put into words how big of a deal this TV series actually was. Between 10 and 11 million people watched the original 6-episode broadcast on BBC One on Sunday evenings from the 24th of September to the 29th of October 1995, and those episodes were repeated each week on BBC Two as well. The final episode of Pride and Prejudice had a market share of about 40% in Britain. To put it into some perspective, major TV programmes of the likes of EastEnders regularly drew audiences of 20 million. So about half of an EastEnders audience watched a Jane Austen adaptation on Sunday evening on the BBC in 1995. To put into even more perspective, the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales in 1997 had 32 million viewers. So the fact that a 6-part adaptation of Pride and Prejudice had a third of the viewers of the funeral of a widely popular member of the royal family, the People's Princess, who died incredibly young, kind of gives you an idea of how popular this series actually was. It was so popular that when it was released on double VHS in the week of the final episode's airing, the first run of 12,000 copies sold out within 2 hours. It sold 70,000 copies in its first week. It sold 200,000 copies in its first year. And this was despite the fact that you can literally take this show off the TV for free. It's also been released on DVD 4 times in 2000, 2005, 2007 and 2009. It's been transferred into high definition from the original negatives and released on Blu-ray in 2008 and 2009, but the BBC has never broadcast it in HD due to it being shot in 16mm. It's also been released in 2010 as a remastered edition and 2014 as a keepsake edition with improved colours. A restored 4K version was released in 2010 and was available to stream on Amazon, but a 4K physical media version has yet to be released. It remains one of the BBC's most popular and beloved shows, inspiring hundreds of articles, and with the rest of Austen mania caused the Jane Austen Society's memberships to jump 50%. It's continued to be honoured 30 years later, being named one of the 40 greatest TV programmes ever made in 2003 by the Radio Times, and in 2007 the UK Film Council named it a virtual brochure for British history and society. Its various locations experienced increases in tourism, with Lime Hall in Cheshire tripling its visitors after the series was aired. Critical reception was overwhelmingly positive too, with praise for the cast, locations, screenplay, and just being a splendid adaptation. 30 years later, it's literally still the best Austen adaptation, closely followed by 1995 Austen mania stablemates Sense and Sensibility and Clueless. Yes, Clueless is one of the best adaptations of Jane Austen, and I will die on that hill. Pride and Prejudice received BAFTA Television Award nominations for Best Drama Serial, Best Costume Design, and Best Makeup and Hair, with Colin Firth and Jennifer Ehle both receiving nominations for Best Actor and Best Actress at the BAFTAs, with Benjamin Whitrow also nominated for Best Actor. Jennifer Ehle would win Best Actress for her work in Pride and Prejudice. Firth and Whitrow lost to Robbie Coltrane for Cracker. The series was Emmy nominated for its achievements as an outstanding miniseries, as well as for choreography and writing, and it won the Primetime Emmy Award for outstanding individual achievement in costume design for a miniseries or a special. Pride and Prejudice also received a Peabody Award, a Television Critics Association Award, and a Golden Satellite Award nomination for outstanding achievements as a serial. I think it's pretty obvious that I love this adaptation. However, I'm not an expert on period drama. If only one could go back in time and meet some agreeable ladies who do know all about period dramas. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a film history podcaster in possession of a good period drama must be in want of a podcast who specialises in period drama. So welcome to Verbal Diorama, Kim and Alice from Fetch the Smelling Salts, who are definitely handsome enough to tempt me. Welcome, ladies.
I'm blushing now.
Welcome to Verbal Diorama. This is a very special occasion. And so who better to have on a special podcast about a very special BBC TV series than a very special period drama podcast? Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. And happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yes, happy birthday.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to have you here. And before we started recording, I mentioned that obviously, this is a very special episode and I don't usually do this, but I just had to get you guys on because it's Pride and Prejudice. And I know that you may love this, like just as much, maybe a little bit more than I do.
Oh my
so
God. This is like the Holy Grail. This
Yeah.
is the best thing.
I wish there were a little scale over everybody's head that said like how much they love Pride and Prejudice 1995. And it just like, are you right at the top? Are you at 100? Are you at like a 50? I just need to know before I approach people.
Yeah, that's true. It would be like, if you hate Pride and Prejudice 995. I don't even want to talk to you.
No.
That would be nice in general. I feel like on like dating apps, I'd like to
Mm.
know, are you Mr. Darcy or are you Mr. Collins? I just want to know like the general vibe you've got going on.
Do you like boiled potatoes?
Stop. You know that's not in this adaptation.
I know, but fine.
Just on off the cuff question, how do you ladies feel about the 2005 film adaptation, the one with Keira Knightley?
Oh, I do like it. I know it's not the same. It's a very different vibe. But I can't say no to Matthew McFadden ever. And Kim, you're not a Keira Knightley fan. I'm not a huge Keira Knightley
I'm not a
fan.
Keira Knightley fan. I really am not a Keira Knightley fan. So, but I do like it despite her. So I
I
will
just
say,
went and
so,
saw it for it just had its 20th anniversary.
of
And
course.
and I just went and saw it the re-release in the theater and it hit me. I
Yeah.
loved it.
Mm,
I think it's nice, but there's not enough there. And I
no,
think that's
no.
why I love the 1995 BBC one so much, because there's so much there. They've got 6 hours to tell this story. And I guess kind of from you guys, what I'd really want to know is why does the 1995 version just persist in the public consciousness? Because there's been so many versions of Pride and Prejudice
Mm.
over the years and so many BBC versions as well. And what is it do you think about this one in particular that's just kind of persisted like in pop culture and everyone still talks about it and everyone loves it, and we're here on a podcast talking about it because we love it so much? Why do you guys think that is?
I've been thinking about this question a lot since you asked, and I was thinking what was the moment in time in the universe when this first came out and what was happening. I think people have always loved Jane Austen stories, and Pride and Prejudice is probably the most universally loved because it's such a great universal story, right? Like how many adaptations have actually been made of the book, of the story in like modern times, and it's something that translates so beautifully. So it's a universally engaging story. First of all, would you agree with that, Kim?
Yep,
Do you think
yep.
it's the best of her novels, first of all?
I think, I mean, it's hard, you know. I think that, again, remember, unlike you, I've not read all of her novels. Yeah. So
Hmm.
reading, you know, it's a bit hard. It's like knowing the stories is one thing, but in terms of reading the novels, I've only read what, three of them? Four? Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, there is something about the story that can be boiled down to, you know, very kind of like, I don't know, like archetypes
Yeah,
that can
it's
transcend.
translatable.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why it was done as a Bollywood version.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think we've talked about this on our podcast. We love seeing these stories that are told, like Shakespearean stories that are told in different cultures. And Pride and Prejudice is one of those, even if it's not your favorite Austen novels. Like my favorite Austen novel is Northanger Abbey. And but I think that that story isn't as universal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
There's something that's a bit stuck in time, it's stuck in place
Mm-hmm.
in a way
Mm-hmm.
that Pride and Prejudice can like go out across the world.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see Pride and Prejudice made as a period drama set in every single culture across the world or in different time periods. I want like an Elizabethan one. I would like just like a Meiji era Japan one. I would just everywhere. Um, but in terms of when this adaptation was made, I think it was also a particular time in the history of period dramas and adaptations for Jane
Yes.
Austen novels. So before this, you'd had other BBC productions, and it was really the BBC that you were counting on to make these Jane Austen productions, but they were essentially stage shows that were filmed. And so you had stage actors and you had kind of stage production, stage sets, stage costumes, which you could, you weren't getting a whole lot from the costumes, from the sets, that kind of thing. They did a wonderful job, and I think a lot of them are really beautiful. I really love the Mansfield Park, for example. which is very kind of stage adaptation-y, but true to the book. And these stage adaptations just were
I mean,
like
it didn't
seeing
give
a
you
play.
exactly. It didn't give you that full kind of like immersive experience, in a way. So when you're watching a play, right? There's still that separation of space. You still feel like you're outside watching. As much as you want to get sucked into play, there's still that separation between like audience and
Yeah.
performers. And yeah, you're right that this one was kind of like at the cusp of like basically when things were changing, when it was just really giving you the experience.
Yes. So
Yeah.
that's why I mentioned Mansfield Park, because that was one of the first ones to kind of do this more for television production rather than looking like it's very much on a stage. And second, you have some incredible actors. You have Colin Firth, Jennifer Ely, people who were already like pretty big, very, very good actors. And the productions decided that they were going to make them movie quality and very historically accurate and very accurate to the book and stick to the source material in a very true way. And I think because this was a new thing at the time, this is the first time that you are getting Pride and Prejudice, such an incredible, beloved story done to this level. And no one has met that yet. No one, in my opinion, I think in all of our opinion, in any other Jane Austen adaptation, however much you love it, there are other Jane Austen adaptations, especially BBC adaptations, that I absolutely love, but no one has done it like Pride and Prejudice because no other story is like Pride and Prejudice, and no other production is like the BBC production. And once you're that original, once you have hit that high, you're always chasing that period drama dragon.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because looking into the making of this, it is literally like some of the biggest names in TV, in acting, in costume. I mean, this is a lavish production. They spent serious money on this. And I mean, you can tell because it looks beautiful. The costumes are beautiful. The production design is beautiful. They're going on location shoots. You mentioned obviously being on sets before. It's like, no, this is actually like proper on location shoots in like Wiltshire and Cheshire and Derbyshire and all of these beautiful stately homes that you can actually still visit if you want to. And I think that's really what kind of sets it apart, in the sense that the BBC obviously clearly wanted to invest in period drama, and they chose to invest in, well, personally, this is my favourite of Jane Austen's books. I can't say I've read them all. I'm also a big fan of Emma. I think Emma is just one of those classic stories. And obviously the same year, in 1995, Clueless came out. And the Ang Lee Sense and Sensibility came out. And it was like, there was so much Jane Austen in the atmosphere at the time. And it really was like a moment for Jane Austen. And it's like, then you think, well, actually, she kind of was a thing before then too. But it was something about that particular era where all of these Jane Austen adaptations, I think there was 4 in total in that year, just kind of all came out, and all were really successful, and all of them were really different and brought something different to the table. You mentioned obviously about it being a very faithful adaptation. If you've got 6 hours, you're going to be able to really delve deep into some of those characters and story arcs and themes and all of that sort of stuff. But famously, the pond scene isn't in Jane Austen's original book. However, I think we have to talk about the pond scene because
one of the most iconic scenes.
it's iconic.
Yeah.
And we still talk about it, Bless Colin Firth. He's probably bored of people asking him about the pond. Yeah. But how do you feel about that scene? Like, how did that scene make you feel? Like when you first saw it, because I think
how did it make me feel?
It makes people feel different things. I know how it made me feel, but it's obviously he needs to kind of temper the burning desire that's within him, and so he has to like cool down in this pond, and it's like they made it like so sexy.
I know.
So
I mean,
sexy.
that's the thing, right? Like he's just so. It was so weird. I mean, everything was so kind of just, very much an undercurrent, the undercurrent of sexiness, the undercurrent of,
Yes.
of passion and things. And then all of a sudden, like in that porn scene, it just went, zzz.
Yeah.
We see it. It all comes to the forefront.
Yeah.
I think whoever made that writing decision in the writer's room at BBC, making this script, should be in some kind of BBC Hall of Fame, because this really, to me, set the template again for how to make alterations. If you're going to have a very faithful adaptation, something is always going to be different. And the changes that people make really affect how the audience receives the story. And to have this visual representation of Darcy's simmering passion, it was so simple. It was so perfect. Just have a white shirt that's damp. That shirt recently, didn't it sell at auction?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe it did. For probably a ridiculous amount of money.
Of course.
But it's weird, isn't it? Because just a simple decision for him to just dive into a pond and swim about for a little bit, and then obviously come face to face with Elizabeth, who happens to be at Pemberley on a little tour with her aunt and uncle, as you do. And the chemistry between these two characters is some of the most famous chemistry that I think has ever been put to screen.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. But, at this time, I think people were trying to figure out, Ang Lee was trying to figure it out. Clueless was trying to figure it out. How do you make this timeless story, the story that people already love, and transform it? So it's 1995, so it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but really this was a period where filmmakers and TV producers were trying to figure out, how do we adapt these stories for screen in a way that is going to be wildly popular, that is going to capture the public imagination and going to make us lots and lots of money. And so they were making these really careful decisions, and something so simple, adding in something so simple as a guy getting wet and then having an awkward encounter with his crush, it just turned out to be the perfect choice.
I remember, just watching that scene also and thinking like about how it's just in that one moment, if up till then you hadn't seen, if up till then you hadn't started looking at Darcy as a real person, you know what I mean? Like that scene alone, just him just being human. It's like, this is my house, this is my pond. I can go swimming in it if I want, just like a regular person. I say this.
I go swimming in my pond
I have
all the
my
time.
pond in the back, but yeah, so it kind of just makes him a little bit more human. And then
he's vulnerable. He's embarrassed.
Yeah. I think you've both hit the nail on the head. It shows his humanity, it shows his vulnerability, and maybe that's what does make Elizabeth kind of go, well, hang on a sec. Maybe there's more to this guy than just his immeasurable pride and the fact that he doesn't want to dance and that he's really moody, and you throughout the story you kind of get to know the reasons why he is those things.
As you get to know the reasons, right? But it's still very cerebral. You kind of have to make the connections in your head, and you'd be like, oh yeah, okay, because this happened, and then the thing with his sister, and that's why he's so cautious and stuff. But then this is a very visual, very visceral moment that you don't have to go and do those mental gymnastics of be like, okay, yeah, he's really a nice guy, I misunderstood because XYZ.
Yeah, don't make us think too much. Don't make us have to drum up our empathy. Just get a guy wet, make him embarrassed because he's wondering if his crush can see his nipples. And she can.
Oh.
And that's the beauty of television.
It just proves you don't need masses and masses of exposition. It's just so descriptive and it's so simple.
You also don't need a lot of sex or sexiness. You don't need nudity. You don't need explicit stuff, to get this kind of passionate stuff across. I mean, how many hearts were set aflame by that pond scene? And other than that, I mean, do they even kiss at the end? I honestly can't remember.
I don't remember.
In my head,
I just
they
remember
do.
them getting married. They have
They do. Yeah, they get
go up in
married.
carriage
Or
and-
I'm sure
Yeah.
they have a
kiss at
nice
the
walk
end.
together. Because it doesn't really matter. Because we
matter.
No, it
Yeah.
doesn't. It doesn't.
we get something just as visually visceral.
Yeah. Obviously, I don't want to keep you guys too long because you're only popping by for a quick visit.
Yep.
So, what do you think it is about this adaptation that has secured its legacy as literally the most beloved version of Pride and Prejudice?
I think so. We've already talked about it being kind of right time, right place, right kind of creation. But we haven't even talked about the incredible cast of supporting characters because they are all 201 absolutely iconic. I mean, Mrs. Bennet, Mr.
And
Bennet.
Lydia. This is the best
Lydia.
Lydia.
She is the best Lydia.
Yeah.
She's relatable. She's young. She's supremely annoying,
So
but
annoying.
also a fun time. Like you can't really hate her. So everyone in this is beautifully cast. And they all just make a perfect ensemble to bring the book to life, really. There are so many hooks. It's not just about Colin Firth and Jennifer Ely and their love story or, a very historically accurate production or costumes. And all of this is true. But to have all of these elements coming together, I think especially because of the supporting cast, is just created magic.
Kim, do you have anything that you'd like to add before we finish?
Oh, I just would like to say that, there's a little part of Pride and Prejudice will always also have a very, very special part of my heart, because I have this, and I've told Alice about this before. I just have this memory of, so after I finished, when I graduated from my master's, my parents came to visit me in the UK, and then we had a little Europe trip, etc. And we were in Paris, and I remember in Paris had like a little bit of a heat wave, and we were all the three of us because we're cheap, so 20-something-year-old me was like sleeping in a room on a trundle bed with my parents, right? And in a heat wave in Paris, and there was nothing to do at one point, and I just whipped out my DVD set of Pride and Prejudice because clearly I had it with me as comfort.
Of course.
To take me through the masters. So I was like, guys, we're gonna watch this. And since the three of us huddled over my little laptop watching Pride and Prejudice over a few days. So me, my mom, and my dad, and I don't know. So that also adds a little warm and fuzzy feeling to my heart every time I think about this, this particular adaptation.
Yeah, it's
I
like
love that story.
comfort food. It's like comfort food, but in BBC period drama comfort food. And I think that's a really nice way to describe it because that's how it feels to me. Like as soon as I hear the dun 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 dun, I'm just like there. I'm there. I want to be there.
I think a lot of people have stories like Kim's as well. I think this is the kind of thing that you share with people. You watch it for the first time with someone, you probably have a memory of the first time you watched it or the first time you watched it with someone who is a friend or someone special to you. And I think or you have a memory of always watching it by yourself when you need it. It's something that people have because it's part of your soul.
Yeah.
Yeah, guys, that's such a lovely way to end. I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you for taking the time out of taking a turn around the room to come on Verbal Diorama. Because in vain I have struggled, it will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you both and your incredible podcast, Fetch the Smelling Salts, which is available on all good podcast apps. including the one that you're listening to this podcast on right now. Thank you, Alice and Kim, so much. You're both amazing. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. We love you too. And we're so happy. We're so happy to that you invited us over. And
thank you
we're
for
happy we get to share a special episode with you.
Oh, thank you. It's been amazing.
Huge thank you to Dr. Kim and Dr. Alice for taking the time to chat with me about Pride and Prejudice. They have such a terrific podcast, all about period drama. Once again, it's called Fetch the Smelling Salts. Please go and listen to it. I have even been on it to talk about The Mummy, which is actually a period drama, as well as the greatest movie ever made. Fetch the Smelling Salts is available wherever you found this podcast. I will put some links in the show notes. They are honoured guests, ladies of good breeding and cheerful dispositions, whose warm and witty conversation has made this episode most agreeable indeed. For a whole decade, the 1995 version was the dominant and definitive version. But most importantly, it became the standard that all other adaptations had to follow. And in 2005, a big screen version of Pride and Prejudice, starring Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden, came out, which is the favourite of a lot of people and does a good job at condensing the story down to 2 hours. But for me personally, the 1995 version rules supreme and always will. I'm very sorry if you're a huge fan of the Keira Knightley version. I think it's good, but I don't think it's as great as this. There's also a Netflix version which is currently filming, which will probably also not be as good as this. It's going to star Emma Corrin as Lizzie and Jack Lowden as Darcy and Olivia Colman as Mrs. Bennet, which is actually inspired casting. I will give them that. I'm expecting it to be a little bit like Bridgerton, which is no bad thing. Dolly Alderton is a great writer, so I will definitely watch the Netflix Pride and Prejudice, but I'm not expecting it to be better than this, because nothing is better than this. Probably the most well-known adaptation of Pride and Prejudice is Bridget Jones's Diary, which has Colin Firth also effectively reprise his role, this time as Mark Darcy. There's also a fun Bollywood-style remake called Bride of Prejudice, which came out in 2004, starring Aishwarya Rai as Lanita Bakshi and Martin Henderson as Darcy, directed by Gurinder Chadha. There's been a multitude of film and TV spin-offs, including Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, Lost in Austin, Death Comes to Pemberley, Fire Island, and book spin-offs like Longbourn. But this is, simply put, the definitive version of Pride and Prejudice. It is perfect in every way, with an incredible cast, stunning locations, and just flawlessly captures everything that makes Pride and Prejudice one of the greatest novels ever written, in my opinion. Every time I watch this series, I pick up on more. This time, it was Mr. Gardiner calling Mrs. Bennet Fanny. I had never noticed that before. It's faithful to the book, but also enhances the story. Colin Firth is such a great Darcy that you do immediately see his pride, but he manages to strip back Darcy's layers, and his face is so expressive with his desire for Elizabeth. He's so charismatic, even when he's full of disdain. I don't even care that it's practically impossible for them to so often be in the same place at the same time between Hertfordshire and Derbyshire. I really don't. Jennifer Ely and Colin Firth are both so great, and Lizzie Bennet has always been my favourite heroine, and that's pretty much all down to Jennifer Ely and how she portrays Lizzie's feistiness, her indifference to indifference, and the fact she never once realises the privilege she has to decline 2 marriage proposals in the early 19th century. But I applaud her so much for never giving up on love. Women during that time rarely married for love. Marriages were almost always of convenience, usually monetarily, and women were seen as property. I love that we see that type of marriage in Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, and how miserable and incompatible they both are, and how much that's mirrored in the unfortunate pairing of Lydia and Wickle. She's 15, my dude. It's not okay. But how much that's all avoided by both Lizzie and Jane's marriages. I love Lizzie's independence and that her father actively promotes that. In fact, Alice from Fetch the Smelling Salts hosts a sister podcast called Austin After Dark. And if you've ever wondered about what the residents of Meryton, Netherfield and Pemberley get up to once the candles go out, check out the Pride and Prejudice episode of that podcast. It is for adults only, but very fun, and I will never look at Jane and Bingley the same way ever again. This adaptation, though, it's lavish, memorable, perfectly paced, allows the time to build relationships and characters. It had the benefit of not really having much to compare it to. It's a demure romance that builds slowly. The characters don't even kiss till the very end, and it uses subtext brilliantly. Everything is spoken in mannerisms, body language, and facial expression, but the dialogue is intelligent and witty. It may not be modern to marry for financial security, but we all understand how important financial security is. Most importantly, the main characters aren't perfect. They're flawed, relatable, and first impressions count, but aren't the be-all and end-all. If anything, it makes you believe in true love. I'm open to it. And for 10,000 a year, I hope his shirt never dries out. Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on Pride and Prejudice in general, but specifically this version of Pride and Prejudice. And as always, thank you for your continued support of this podcast. I'm not going to go through the normal blurb that I go through at the end, because this is effectively a bonus episode, and the real next episode of this podcast is Showgirls. That's coming out in a couple of days and is nothing like this whatsoever. But if you do want to talk to me about Pride and Prejudice, you can find me on social media at Verbal Diorama. I would really appreciate it if you would tell your friends and family about this podcast and also leaving a rating or review, especially because it's my birthday and I would love a birthday rating and review. Once again, huge thank you to Kim and Alice from Fetch the Smelling Salts for joining me for this very special episode of the podcast. When I thought about doing an episode on Pride and Prejudice, they were the only people that I wanted to speak to, because if you're going to do an episode on the definitive period drama, you get the definitive period drama podcast. I am so grateful for their time a few weeks ago. Also, huge thanks to the patrons for continuing to support this podcast, not just on my birthday, but every day. And most importantly, huge thank you to everyone who is listening to this podcast. If you are listening on release day, it is my birthday, and there is a high probability that I will be eating copious amounts of birthday cake. Even though this episode releases at 6 a.m. in the morning, chances are I will still be eating copious amounts of birthday cake. I am genuinely so grateful to everyone who listens to this podcast and who gets the same amount of joy from listening to this podcast that I get from making this podcast. And honestly, doing an episode about Pride and Prejudice is pretty much the pinnacle for me. That's when it comes to joy on doing a podcast like this. So I am so grateful to you all for listening. And finally,
You are too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes are unchanged. But one word from you will silence me on this subject forever.
Oh, my feelings. My feelings are... I'm ashamed to remember what I said then. My feelings are so different. In fact, they are quite the opposite.
Lady Catherine told me of her meeting with you. I may say that her disclosure had quite the opposite effect to the one she intended. It taught me to hope as I'd scarcely ever allowed myself to hope before. I knew that had you absolutely decided against me, you would have acknowledged it openly.
Yes, you know enough of my frankness to believe me capable of that. After abusing you so abominably to your face, I could have no scruple in abusing you to all your relations.
What did you say of me that I did not deserve? My behavior to you at the time was unpardonable. I can hardly think of it without abhorrence. Your reproof I shall never forget. Had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner, You know not how those words have tortured me.
Not the smallest idea of their ever being taken in such a way.
I can easily believe it. You thought me devoid of every proper feeling. I'm sure you did. The turn of your countenance I shall never forget. You said that I could not have addressed you in any possible way that would induce you to accept me.
Do not repeat what I said then.
No, I've been a selfish being all my life. As a child, I was given good principles, but was left to follow them in pride and conceit. And such I might still have been, but for you. Dearest, loveliest Elizabeth.
Engaged to Mr. Darcy.
Bye.
Movies you know, movies you don't.